It's time now for Media Watch, and I'm joined here by James Creedon. Good evening, James.
Hi, Sanam.
You've been looking at one of our top stories this evening, and that's, of course, the attacks in Sri Lanka and the blocking of social media in the country after those attacks.
That's right. So, somewhat controversial decision. There are pros, there are cons, there are reasons for justifying it and reasons to be concerned, I suppose. So we'll just have a look through all of those arguments, or at least some of them. Sri Lanka blocks social media after the deadly Easter explosions. That's a headline in one tech website, cnet.com. They have a tweet from the Prime Minister condemning the cowardly attacks and calling on people to avoid propagating unverified reports and speculation via social media. And then he goes on to say that the government is taking immediate steps to contain the situation. Others saying via Twitter, which wasn't blocked, well, if I don't reply to messages on WhatsApp and Facebook, it's basically because they've been shut down in Sri Lanka. So some people are concerned about that, and you have some organisations that track the blocking of social networks online, such as netblocks.org, cataloguing all of the social media that were blocked: Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram, YouTube, Viber, but not Twitter, because basically it's not that widely used in Sri Lanka. The Guardian saying the dangers, from their point of view, from the point of view of these journalists, do outweigh the advantages of social media. Now, they point to what happened after the awful attack in Christchurch, where there were live images broadcast on Facebook, and it took about a half an hour for people to kind of clamp down on that. So that's a very good example of the concerns, the very real concerns. You have Kenneth Roth here of Human Rights Watch saying, last year, after viral rumours and calls to violence circulating on Facebook appearing to provoke anti-Muslim riots, Sri Lanka repeatedly warned Facebook about this, but the company officials largely failed to respond until the government shut down access. Now, what's unusual about this particular case, as the New York Times points out, is the government shut down access before any social media-inspired violence was known to have taken place. So it was preemptive, but on the basis of the fact that there had been previous concerns and previous warnings issued to Facebook. Now, one Colombo-based researcher, Sanjana Hatatua, says here that that basically Facebook flounders under the sheer volume of content and limitations of its algorithms. In countries like Myanmar and Sri Lanka, our languages aren't spoken anywhere else in the world. So basically, the machine learning, artificial intelligence that goes into the proactive identification of inflammatory language, it doesn't work in Sri Lanka. In other words, Facebook can't manage, because they don't really get, the languages are too difficult to monitor, and there's too much of this content circulating.
And so, of course, you said at the beginning that this is very polarising, and some are saying that censorship can't be justified in the name of trying to prevent the flow of misinformation.
That's right. It's a real debate online. You have another Colombo-based commentator here saying, you know, American journalists seem to, he's saying that he seems to think that American journalists are happy to see Facebook being kind of reined in, but in a country such as Sri Lanka with tight government controls on traditional media, social media is a boon for us, he says. He goes on to say in another tweet, you have to understand that violence in Sri Lanka began before social media, internet, etc. To a large extent, much of the race hatred is still fueled by print media in this country. So if you want to point fingers, you know, be careful where you're pointing fingers, because actually some of the inflammatory language is coming from traditional media. This is Megha Rajapalopoulos of BuzzFeed, who's looking at this as well. She says news media is controlled in Sri Lanka. Journalists are under a lot of pressure, so people seeking legitimate information do rely on social media. And VPNs allow you to get around hate groups and whatever, to get around those blocks anyway. So it's a very complex picture.
That's the thing. Many countries, people have found a way to circumvent these blocks. So how effective that is a different question. Lastly, I want to move to France, where there's been criticism of the arrest of two journalists who covered the Gilets jaunes, the yellow vest protests this past weekend.
That's right. One in particular, Gaspard Glons, this is the third time he's been taken into police custody for covering incidents of, I suppose, police managing crowd control, whatever, in Calais in the past, when there was a dismantling of the migrant camps up there. He also got arrested. In any case, he's a journalist who, as this headline in Libération says, annoys the police, because basically one of his concerns, I think, is trying to document incidents where you could have police brutality. Now, that has already been documented in the crowd control around the Gilets jaunes protests. You have this AFP report: 23 people have lost eyes. You've had hundreds of incidents of people, with serious injuries because of stun grenades, grenades, rubber bullets, whatnot. So you could argue that photojournalists are playing a very important role in terms of trying to, make sure that this stuff gets documented. And you do have, this is a journalist who has put up a blog appealing for the police to be disarmed, at least in terms of the heavy machinery they have been using. So the line between photojournalism and, I suppose, activism is somewhat maybe grey. It's a bit of a grey zone at times. But just to get back to the case of Gaspard Glons, he was actually also under police surveillance because he had been identified as somebody who is perhaps not just a neutral journalist, but somebody with certain political leanings. There was this instance in Calais where he called it a war trophy, a prise de guerre. That's a walkie-talkie from the CRS that had been dropped and that he managed to pick up. He says, I just wanted to give it back to them. But the police have identified him as somebody who they think is trouble. But he's saying, I'm just doing my job and there's police brutality going on. And so it's a tricky one. He was arrested and held in custody for 48 hours. You have Reporters Without Borders and many other journalism unions being very critical of that.
Of course, another topic that divides. James Creedon, thank you so much for taking a look at those